All right, so I tried to just use one slide to summarize the growing season so far. And again, if you're a producer on this call, I know you're well aware of the situation, but just want to summarize it for everybody's benefit. So we had dry conditions this spring, minimal snowfall over the winter. So this led to an early spring. And, I would say most producers were fairly hopeful just with the early planting season, especially since some struggled last year with too wet of conditions. But right away, subsoil moisture was a concern. Many producers hadn't received measurable precipitation for quite a few months. And then unfortunately, the traditional spring rains never came, at least not widespread rains. And then once the crop was in the ground, struggled with emergence issues, both due to the lack of moisture, but then also we had some cold weather in May, which delayed that emergence, and we had uneven emergence in many parts of the state. After that, hot, dry, and I guess I would add windy conditions have dominated the growing season. So obviously we've seen yield potential reduced. Producers have been making choices about whether to abandon fields, depending on yield potential and just their situation, especially if livestock are involved. Another issue this year is just extremely variable conditions, and this has made assessing the crop as a whole very, very difficult. So we even have producers, on the same farm have very different outcomes for their wheat based on when it was planted and if and when they got rain. So much more variable than normal. This heat that we've had throughout most of the summer pushed crop development ahead of normal, of course, affected yield, but also just pushed the progress ahead of average. Harvest will start soon. I think here in southern North Dakota, there's talk that there could be some starting this week already. So here's just a few photos that kind of just give you a visual of what we're seeing around the state. So, in the top left corner, you can see, so this would be a field that had uneven emergence. So there's spots where the crop was headed out and spots where it was, in the third or excuse me, the fourth or fifth leaf stage. So extremely variable. Here's a situation where, the crop looks nice and green from the road. And then when you get in there, you can see the head size is about half of what it would normally be. And then we have a crop here on the top right that actually looks pretty good, had some decent rain. But even with this crop, with the heat that we've had for grain fill, expecting maybe an average crop at best. Bottom left here, of course, shows a very drought-stressed crop, very thin stand. You can see the dry soil, the bottom leaves dying off. So a very, very low yielding crop. The middle picture shows a crop that's been abandoned already and baled for hay. And then on the bottom right, again, another situation where it looks decent from the road, but you can see looking at the wheat had some drought stress placed on that crop. So extremely variable and obviously a difficult growing season. I know some of our speakers are going to get into more of the, some of these precipitation maps, but I guess just to highlight, this red circle is the bulk of the spring wheat growing region. There is a bit that's grown in the PNW as well. But, for the first 6 months of 2021, you can see precipitation levels were anywhere from 25% of normal levels. In the better areas, 75%. So obviously well below precipitation. This precipitation map shows precipitation during, beginning of planting through the end of June. So same area, and you can see 25% to 70% of normal precipitation was fairly common. A small portion of northwest North Dakota did get more normal rainfall levels, but you can see a very small area, and they haven't gotten a lot of precipitation since then. So really, there are some isolated areas that received fairly normal precipitation, but as a whole, as I said, that 25 to 70% of normal precipitation is what we're seeing in the spring wheat region. So then I mentioned the hot temperatures. So this is the departure from normal temperatures throughout the month of June. So again, the circle represents the spring wheat growing area. And you can see our temperatures were, 6 to 10 degrees above normal. So wheat obviously is a cool season crop, likes cooler temperatures. So this heat, especially this early in the season, really stressed the crop. Every week, the USDA releases a crop progress report, and in that report, they have a crop condition rating. So it's rated, they use very poor to excellent as their rating levels. This has nothing to do with quality. It's simply an indicator of yield potential, disease pressure, just a visual rating of the crop. In our office, we put it into an index just to visually show the differences. So the higher the number means the better condition of the crop. So if you look at the last 2 years and the 5-year average, this is fairly typical of what we see. Generally very strong crop condition ratings, especially at the beginning of the season. We do sometimes see them drop off as we get into July because we do see dry conditions. This year, though, you can see they dropped off right away at the beginning of the season, and that's a very atypical situation. So the crop condition ratings, and this is specifically for spring wheat, are actually the lowest that we've seen since 1988. And here's that crop condition rating split out by the US national average and then the 4 major states. So anything in very poor to poor condition is the red and orange color. Good to excellent is the green. So again, if we look at last year's level, and this is a pretty typical crop year, about 70% of the crop was rated in good to excellent condition. Here, US-wide, less than 20% rated good to excellent. And you can see most of the state ratings, 50 to 70% of the crop is rated in poor to very poor condition. Minnesota is faring a little bit better, but in general, those crop condition ratings much lower than normal. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on the details of, production outlook because our speakers are going to do that. But I know a question we get a lot is, how is this year different from other drought years? So for spring wheat here, we have planted acres, harvested, yield, production, and then percent of harvested acres. So I pulled in 1988 and 2002, which were drought years. So you can just see the trends. Obviously in 1988, a very, very low yield. 2002, it wasn't as drastic, but well below normal. So obviously reduced production levels. And if you look at percent harvested in 1988, we abandoned about 22% of the crop. In 2002, it was about 14%. In 2017, we had a drought, but it was specifically the western half of the growing region, whereas the eastern half actually had very, very good crop this year. Or that year, excuse me. So it was kind of 2 different situations. So the overall yield, while it was a bit below average, wasn't as low as anticipated. But you can see the harvest percent was lower than normal at 93%. Normally, we're in that 97 to 98. So for 2021, a couple of things I want to point out are that the harvested acres are still quite high. They have us at 97%. But I just want to note that USDA has not yet accounted for unharvested acres. I believe they won't do that until September. So obviously that's the 97% harvested is way too high of an estimate right now. We know that, but that will be adjusted later. They have our yield, national yield, just over 30 bushels per acre, which is substantially lower if you consider the last 2 years, our average was right around 48. Now, here's that same chart for Durum. One thing I noticed when I was pulling up the Durum numbers is the harvested percentage doesn't seem to be affected as much in drought years. In 1988, 88% was harvested, but obviously you can see a huge reduction in the yield. 2002, you can see we didn't abandon a whole lot, but again, that yield was below average. In 2017, we really did see it affected, though. About 9% of the acres were abandoned. Our yield dropped all the way down to 26%. So obviously, a lot of the durum crop is grown in the western part of the region, and of course, that's where the drought was significant in 2017. So for 2021, our planted acreage is estimated at 1.5 million. So again, they still have that harvested acreage fairly high, but our national yield is only pegged at 25.8 bushels per acre. So at least the USDA is showing a substantial reduction in the yield numbers. So I just wanted to point out those estimates. As I said, our speakers will cover those in more detail. So I'm going to stop there so we can get into the meat of our presentations. And thank you for joining the webinar today. We look forward to the dialogue.